Chris Stewart is the congressman from Utah's 2nd Congressional District. He is also the #1 best-selling, national award-winning author. I think he's one of the best fiction authors out there, and nonfictions as well. Record-setting Air Force pilot and former owner and CEO of a small business and dear friend, Chris Stewart. Welcome to the program, sir. How are you?
It's great to be with you. Thank you so much.
You know, I'm really looking forward. You have to send me your new book. I know it comes out soon, but I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts, Chris, because I know you are looking into some of these deeper things, and you are as concerned as I am about where the country is headed, and it's not going to be politicians that solve it. It's going to be people. Let's switch topics now to NATO and Putin. I'm really concerned with everything that is going on. Putin is going to take the opportunity to destabilize the world. He is dictating the negotiations with NATO right now, making demands of the West, telling us to get out of the former Soviet bloc. What do you see on the horizon?
Well, I think you're exactly right. You used the word that I used, Glenn. You said reorder. He intends to reorder the entire European security apparatus that has provided stability there for going on 50 years. What Vladimir Putin is threatening to do hasn't been done in 2 generations, not since 1968 in Czechoslovakia. And that is, he's going to, as I said, reorder the entire security apparatus. He's going to dictate NATO defense policy. I mean, for heaven's sakes, he put forward these demands that can't possibly be met, even by a weak administration such as we're living under right now.
What are the demands? What are the demands that he's asking for right now?
Well, I think I would categorize them in basically 3. First, he wants to halt NATO expansion into any Eastern or former Warsaw Pact nations. And these are free and independent nations. They have the ability, they have the right to determine their own future. He's denying them. He wants to deny the Ukraine access and use of any NATO weapons in order to defend themselves. You know, it's interesting that he goes into Crimea, he goes into the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine, and then demands that they have no weapons to defend themselves. And finally, he wants them to surrender and accept the terms of Russian terms to end hostilities in eastern Ukraine. And he's pretending as if Ukraine wants to join Russia, wants to rebuild the former Soviet Union, and they do not. I mean, the polling on this is difficult to do, but it's really interesting. The vast majority of Ukrainians will intend to defend themselves. They're not just going to walk quietly into this dark place of Russia and Russia dominance, and they want to fight. And that's one of the things our president has got to do, Glenn, is to indicate that he will support a resistance, because the Ukrainian people will resist this.
So, Chris, the problem is, I don't think our president has any intention of doing this. He has given, I mean, they talked about collusion with Russia and Donald Trump. Couldn't have been further from the truth, as we know now. But also, Donald Trump was really harsh. He said nice things, but he was harsh on Russia. This guy is the exact opposite. He'll say mean things, but he's not. He's opening the doors and letting Putin walk right through it. What does it mean if he does walk through these doors?
Well, as I say, it reorders all of European security. It's a generational moment. And, you know, Glenn, you said something that I just have to respond to if I could, and that was this, you know, this just a fabrication, just this absolute fantasy land that we heard for 4 years, that Donald Trump, A, colluded with Russians to get elected, and B, therefore was soft on Russia. And exactly the opposite was true. Donald Trump pressured NATO, unlike any previous president, to pay their dues, to increase their defense spending. Why? So they could counter Russia. Donald Trump had an energy policy that took away the greatest asset Russia has, and that's selling energy and getting the international finance from their own energy resources, primarily to Western Europe. He made that more difficult for them. Donald Trump gave weapons, kinetic weapons, to Ukraine to defend themselves when the previous administration did not. And anyone who doesn't recognize that and continues with this fantasy that Trump somehow was soft on Russia and that Biden is going to be firm with them, exactly the opposite is true, as the evidence clearly indicates. For example, last week, the president says, well, maybe we're going to withdraw troops from Eastern Europe if that'll stop him from invading Ukraine. Talk about folding before the battle even begins. That's what the president proposed last week.
So, Chris, most Americans are sick of war, sick of, fighting somebody else's war, being the world's policeman. We always get nailed for it. We always cause more problems, it feels like. And NATO has been something that people have been like, okay, why are we even over there anymore? Explain what happens, because they said that Donald Trump was trying to destroy NATO and it was so important. This will destroy NATO. And what does that mean? Because I know that the new regime in Germany, they are now facing right directly east. They are going towards Russia as their main ally, not the United States. What does this actually mean to us if this happens?
Well, it changes the world in many ways. And by the way, again, Glenn, I got to comment on something you just said, and that was the people proposing that Donald Trump was trying to destroy NATO by asking them to defend themselves and to pay for their own defense. It's just intuitively absurd. But, look, there's things, and by the way, too, Glenn, I count myself among those Americans you described who said we shouldn't be interfering and have military interventions. We've seen from the last generation how poorly those can end and how it weakens our ability to concentrate on the real threat, which is Russia and China, particularly China. But, you say, what does it mean? Well, it means that the world changes dramatically, especially for Europe, but by extension to us. And final point, I would not support sending U.S. troops to defend Ukraine, and we shouldn't have to. If this president takes reasonable steps, he can dissuade Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine, but he's got to be willing to take a stand that he has not been willing to do yet.
If you were in charge of the, it used to be called the nuclear countdown clock, going closer to war, closer to peace, would you be moving the minute hand towards midnight? Or not? Well, when we're faced with the perilous situation we are right now, I absolutely would. And I've told people for the last 2 months, keep your eye on Ukraine. This isn't like last April. The intel on this is really clear. This is very different than his posturing and positioning in the past. The intel is very clear that he actually intends to do this. But once again, Glenn, the president could dissuade him. If he actually proposed sanctions, not against Vladimir Putin and the oligarchs around him, they've already been sanctioned to death. They've already gotten a way around that. Propose sanctions that affect the people in Russia so that he loses his public support. Say he's going to put permanent bases in Poland and the Baltics as a bastion against further expansion. Deny him access to international finance markets by cutting him off from SWIFT. And proposing to arm the resistance, I think if he did those four things, Vladimir Putin would look at it and say, it's too painful, it's too difficult, I won't do it. The president hasn't talked about any of those things.